Hi, everybody. Um, I am recording this in hopes to commemorate my mother's journey into dementia. And I hope to not make this too maudlin or too serious, although it's an extraordinarily serious topic. There's also some really kind of hilarious things about this that are just sort of crazily unexpected. So, the first thing is I wanted to be descriptive in what I would discuss in terms of my mom's experience. And so I wanted to come up with a phrase that would describe what she's going through. And I was thinking about something written by C.S. Lewis called Shadowlands. And so I looked up the definition, as you can see here on the screen, that it's a place in shadow or an indeterminate borderland between places or states, typically represented as an abode of ghosts and spirits. And I thought it's sort of descriptive of what my mom is going through. So my mom is currently 88 years old. Her name is Diane Foley, and she's a retired registered nurse. She also has a master's degree in communication, and she taught communication as an adjunct at a couple of colleges. So it's really sad to see her decline because um, she's a very intelligent person, and this is really extraordinarily sad to see her intellect disappear into this disease. She's also very eccentric person, but I'll talk more about that later. But the main thing that I like to bring up in this first video is that this happened very quickly. My mom was living on her own in her own condo until the end of April of the year 2021. And at the end of April, she ended up having a urinary tract infection. No, excuse me, she had C. diff, which is infection of the intestines. And she was put into Billings Hospital. They treated her until she was no longer dehydrated and released her to go home. Then she started to have diarrhea again, or continued to have diarrhea, and she didn't really want to talk about with me. So she ended up back in the hospital. And then the third time she walked herself up to the hospital. And once again, I'll go into a lot of detail with that. But the third time she went in, they held her at the hospital and then put her in rehab, because over the course of those 2.5 months, from the end of April till July 23rd of 2021, her cognitive function went down just astronomically fast. And today is August 31st, and her cognitive function is so much worse than I could have imagined even a couple of weeks ago. So it's been very progressive and very fast and very unpredictable. So one of the features of my mother's dementia, which may or may not be dementia, may actually speak to something else medically, but she hallucinates, and she sees kids a lot. She sees her grandmother a lot. She sees my father. She looks for my father, who's been dead since 1986. Um, and she just in general has a lot of really interesting hallucinations. So the first time I noticed it was when she was still living at home, and I was getting ready to take her to lunch, and I was really getting worried about her, but because she's intelligent, she has a high IQ and a great vocabulary, she can kind of hide this from people. So she started talking about all these kids running around, and so she told me this story. The first thing she wanted me to do when I left her house with her was she wanted me to check to make sure that all the kids were in her condo, that I wasn't locking any of the kids out of her condo. And so I would check, and that would be fine. Then the first big wild story she told me, which is where I'll end today, was she quit understanding that she owned her condo. She knew that she had a condo manager. Her condo manager's name is Linda, but she thought that somebody else owned the entire building, and she couldn't remember that lady's name, so she started calling her Her Highness. And she's pretty irritated with Her Highness all the time. So the first big story she told me was Her Highness had put an ad in the Billings, Montana newspaper to have all the children in Billings come to the house for a party. And my mom thought, oh, that's very sweet of Her Highness to do this. But she found out that Her Highness actually wasn't there. So she left all the kids to my mom. So my mom had them over for a snack, and she took them to the garage to go dancing, and they played games and they had prizes. And then she brought them up to her condo, and she mentioned that each one of the children was a very, very good child, but the children called their parents, and then she waited out on the sidewalk with them until their parents came and got them and took them home. And my mom's conclusion is she will never, ever help Her Highness again. So this was really the first time that I realized that things were not really connecting, and that sort of the confusion was sort of the tip of the iceberg, because my mom's really living in a different world that's populated by a lot of different people. And children have been a big feature of this since the beginning. So anyway, there's some other stories that I'll tell, and some of them are, and I'll try to stick to the non-model and in the non, just sort of grim, but some of it's kind of fun. One of it is, I guess what I've learned is correcting her is irrelevant, because that's where she's living. And the only thing I can really do is live with her in that space for a little bit, and also to realize that her attention span is very, very small. So if she has a fantasy, and even if she gets mad at me, which she does a lot, um, that it only lasts for 5 minutes, and 5 minutes later she's on to something else. So the only really bad thing is not the hallucinations and not the confusion, but sometimes she gets really panicky and she gets kind of terrified because she doesn't understand what's happening in the world. So she's constructing a story all the time that is a story in her own mind. And she becomes terrified that she's going to be abandoned or taken outside, or she'll have to catch the bus or something like this. And she doesn't know how to catch the bus, and she doesn't know where she's going to go, and so forth. So, but aside from that, there's some interesting moments, and hope to document this and see if anybody else has had similar experiences. Talk to you later.